my in-laws gathered in their Beacon Hill Mansion's oak-paneled library and told me I would never truly fit their family image unless I agreed to quit my startup and take a suitable position at Richard's company. They suggested I change my wardrobe, adjust my ethnic cooking habits, and attend their country club events every weekend like a proper Parker wife. What they didn't know was that I'd just sold my tech company for 8 figures, and the stocks, they dismissed as my little hobby investments, were now worth more than their entire family fortune. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I didn't argue. I didn't shed a tear. I simply nodded, excused myself, and called my financial advisor. By sunset, I had transferred our assets to separate accounts, put a deposit on a penthouse overlooking Boston Harbor, and drafted a post-nuptial agreement that would make Nathan choose between his trust fund and our marriage based on merit, not family pressure. Without my financial support, the Parkers' carefully curated social facade began to crack. As for me, my real life began the moment I chose my own worth over their perception. I never imagined my anniversary dinner would end like this. After 5 years of marriage to Nathan Parker, I had finally received an invitation to the annual Parker family photo for their holiday card, a seemingly trivial milestone that nonetheless signaled some form of acceptance into their rarefied world. I spent hours preparing a special dinner to celebrate with Nathan in our downtown apartment, hoping to surprise him with both the invitation and the news about my company's acquisition. The spring sunset painted our floor-to-ceiling windows with golden light as I arranged the table with candles and fresh flowers. I'd prepared Nathan's favorite meal, not the stuffy French cuisine his mother insisted was the only acceptable dinner party fare, but the Vietnamese dishes my grandmother had taught me to cook. The fragrance of lemongrass, ginger, and star anise filled our modern kitchen, a scent that always brought me comfort despite Diana Parker's thinly veiled comments about exotic smells when she visited. My phone buzzed with a text from Taylor. "Did you tell him yet?" Followed by champagne bottle emojis. I smiled, typing back, "Tonight after dinner. Still doesn't feel real." The acquisition had happened so quickly. What started as my impractical side project, as Richard called it, had caught the attention of a major tech company. The buyout offer was beyond anything I had imagined when I started coding in my spare time 6 years ago. 8 figures, plus stock options that were already showing promising growth, financial freedom that a girl from my background couldn't have dreamed of. I heard the elevator ding in the hallway and quickly tucked my phone away. I wanted this night to be perfect. Nathan entered, his tall frame still dressed in the bespoke suit he wore to his family's investment firm, his expression uncharacteristically tense. "Something smells amazing," he said, loosening his tie and kissing me briefly. "But can we postpone dinner for an hour? My parents just called. They want to see us right away." I felt my smile falter. "Tonight? It's our anniversary?" He ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture I recognized as discomfort. "I know, and I'm sorry. Dad said it's important. Something about the family trust. We'll make it quick, I promise. And then we'll come back and celebrate properly." The candles flickered as a hint of foreboding settled in my stomach. 5 years had taught me that in the Parker family, nothing took precedence over family matters, not even anniversaries. "Let me change quickly," I said, making a split-second decision to grab the folder with my acquisition paperwork. Perhaps tonight would be the perfect opportunity to show the Parkers that their assessment of me, the scholarship girl from the wrong side of Boston who would never amount to much, had been fundamentally flawed. The Parker mansion stood like an immovable monument to old money on Beacon Hill, its red brick facade and black shutters unchanged for generations. As our car pulled into the circular driveway, I noticed Heather's Mercedes and Andrew's Porsche, already parked alongside Richard's vintage Bentley. The entire family summoned on a Wednesday evening. Whatever this was about, it wasn't routine. Diana opened the door before we could ring the bell, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, pearl, earrings catching the light as she air-kissed my cheeks. "Olivia, dear, so glad you could join us on such short notice." Her smile never reached her eyes. "Happy anniversary, by the way. We'll have to plan something special this weekend at the club." The entrance hall gleamed with polished marble and ancestral portraits, a space designed to intimidate rather than welcome. Nathan squeezed my hand as we followed Diana through to Richard's library, where family discussions always took place. The room smelled of leather-bound books and the cigars Richard pretended not to smoke when Diana was around. The entire Parker clan sat arranged like a tableau. Richard behind his mahogany desk, Andrew and Heather on the leather sofa, with spaces clearly left for Nathan beside his brother and me on the uncomfortable wingback chair slightly apart from the family grouping. The seating arrangement, like everything in this house, was deliberate, a physical manifestation of my perpetual status as an outsider. "Ah, there you are," Richard said, not rising from his chair. "Nathan, Olivia, thank you for coming promptly." I perched on the edge of the wingback chair, the folder with my acquisition papers pressed against my lap like a shield. Nathan sat beside Andrew, unconsciously adjusting his posture to mirror his brother's, a habit I'd noticed but never mentioned. Richard cleared his throat. "I'll come directly to the point. The family has been discussing some concerns about the direction of certain relationships and how they reflect on the Parker name." Diana stepped forward, her voice gentle but unyielding. "What Richard means, dear, is that we've been concerned about some aspects of your integration into the family." I felt, rather than saw Nathan stiffen beside me. "Mother, if this is about Olivia, perhaps we should have discussed this privately first." "This affects all of us," Heather interjected, her country club smile firmly in place. "The Parker name means something in Boston society. We all make sacrifices to uphold that standard." "Exactly," Andrew added. "It's not personal, Olivia. It's about legacy." I sat perfectly still, years of these subtle jabs having taught me to maintain composure. "I see. And what aspects of my integration are concerning the family?" Richard exchanged glances with Diana before leaning forward. "To be blunt, Olivia, you've maintained certain habits and priorities that don't align with what's expected of a Parker spouse. Your continued insistence on working at that startup instead of taking the position we offered at the firm. Your absence from key social functions. Even your reluctance to adapt to the family's lifestyle preferences. What Dad means," Heather said with practiced diplomacy, "is that being a Parker means embracing certain traditions. The charity committee meetings, the country club weekends, the right social circles, these aren't optional when you carry our name." Diana nodded. "And darling, we've tried to guide you gently. Those introductions to my personal shopper, the invitations to my women's committee luncheons, the suggestions about suitable employment. The cooking classes I gifted you last Christmas," Heather added. "French cuisine is so much more appropriate for entertaining than, well, the food you grew up with." Each word landed like a perfectly aimed dart. 5 years of trying to earn their approval while maintaining my identity crystallized in that moment into perfect clarity. They would never see me as enough. Not unless I erased every trace of who I actually was. "I understand," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "You're saying I don't fit your family image?" Richard looked relieved at my directness. "Precisely. And with the Whitcomb Charity Gala approaching and the family holiday photos next month, we feel it's time for a more concerted effort on your part. Diana has prepared a sort of roadmap to help you better align with family expectations." Diana smiled benevolently as she handed me a crisp folder with Parker Family Integration, written in elegant calligraphy on the cover. I opened it to find a detailed plan including a suitable employment transition to the Parker Foundation, a schedule of social events marked as mandatory, recommended wardrobe brands with my size already noted, and even a meal planning guide for appropriate home entertaining. We've also taken the liberty of scheduling you for weekly sessions with Heather to practice proper etiquette and social conversation, Diana continued. She's so gifted at navigating difficult social waters, and Dad's arranged a position for you at the foundation, Andrew added. Nothing too demanding, but respectable. You can give notice at your project next week. I felt a strange calm settle over me as I looked around at their expectant faces. They had planned my entire identity transition without a moment's consideration for who I actually was or what I had accomplished. Even Nathan sat silent, his discomfort evident, but his opposition notably absent. "And what does Nathan think of this plan?" I asked, turning to my husband. All eyes shifted to Nathan, who cleared his throat uncomfortably. "I think there's merit to considering family traditions, but perhaps the timeline is a bit aggressive. Not a defense, not a rejection of their premise, just a weak negotiation on the implementation timeline." "I see," I said quietly. I set Diana's folder aside and opened my own. "Before I respond to your roadmap, I'd like to share some news of my own." I handed Nathan the acquisition papers first. His eyes widened as he scanned the numbers. "Olivia, is this real?" "What is it?" Richard asked, professional interest piqued. "My project, as you call it, has just been acquired," I said, passing copies of the summary sheet to Richard and Diana. "The final papers were signed yesterday. The valuation and terms are all there." Silence fell as the Parkers processed the figures in front of them. 8 figures plus stock options that were already worth millions more. Financial independence that dwarfed even the Parker family trust returns over the past decade. Diana recovered first. "Well, this is unexpected. Congratulations, Olivia. Perhaps we can discuss how to properly announce this in the right circles. The Whitcomb Gala might be an appropriate venue to—" "I don't think you understand," I interrupted, rising from my chair. "I'm not seeking your approval for my professional accomplishments. I'm informing you that the project you've dismissed for years has rendered your financial leverage obsolete." Richard's face darkened. "Now, see here, young lady." "No, you see?" I continued, gathering my papers and Diana's untouched integration plan. "I've spent 5 years trying to earn acceptance from a family that was never going to truly welcome me. I've altered my speech, adapted my schedule, endured countless subtle insults about my background, and watched my husband gradually choose family pressure over partnership." I turned to Nathan, whose expression had shifted from shock to something unreadable. "I love you, but I won't erase myself to become an acceptable Parker accessory. So now you have a choice to make. Not tonight, but soon." I placed Diana's integration plan on Richard's desk. "Thank you for your detailed suggestions, but I won't be needing them. Nathan, I'm going home. Join me when you're ready to discuss our future, as equals." The library remained utterly silent as I walked out, heels clicking purposefully across the marble foyer. Only when I reached the street did I allow myself a deep breath of the cool evening air, heavy with the scent of freedom and possibility. Instead of calling a car, I walked several blocks, letting the spring air clear my head before pulling out my phone. My fingers hovered over Taylor's contact before switching to another name. I needed professional advice before emotion could cloud my judgment. Jackson Williams, my financial advisor, answered on the second ring. "Olivia, congratulations again on the acquisition. We should be celebrating, not having a late call." "The celebration might need to wait, Jackson. I need to make some changes to my accounts. Tonight, if possible." Something in my voice must have conveyed the urgency. "What kind of changes are we talking about?" "I need to separate my assets from the joint accounts with Nathan. Not everything, but enough to ensure independence if things change. There was a brief pause. This sounds serious. Are you somewhere you can talk freely? I will be in 20 minutes. Can you meet me at your office? By the time I arrived at the gleaming financial district tower that housed Jackson's firm, the sun had fully set. Boston's skyline glittered against the darkening sky, lights reflecting in the harbor waters. The security guard nodded in recognition as I entered the lobby. I'd been a client since before my company took off, back when Jackson was one of the few advisors willing to take a chance on a young woman with big dreams and modest savings. Jackson was waiting in his corner office, jacket discarded, sleeves rolled up, and multiple screens displaying my financial portfolio. At 40-something with salt and pepper hair and a reputation for brutal honesty, he'd become more mentor than service provider over the years. "All right," he said as I took a seat. "Tell me what happened with the in-laws this time." For the next 15 minutes, I recounted the evening's events, watching Jackson's expression shift from concern to indignation to a kind of grim satisfaction when I described revealing the acquisition. "About damn time they realized who they've been belittling," he muttered. "So what's the plan now? Full financial separation?" I shook my head. "Not yet. I need to protect myself without closing the door completely. Nathan needs a chance to decide where he stands without his family's influence." Jackson nodded, turning back to his screens. "Let's create a tiered approach then. We'll move your acquisition proceeds and pre-marriage investments to individual accounts immediately. For joint assets, we can restructure rather than separate. Maintain the connection, but with new terms that protect your interests." "And the penthouse I've had my eye on? The one overlooking the harbor?" A smile tugged at his lips. "The Duncan. Property? Consider it yours. I can call the realtor right now with a cash offer." "Do it," I said, making a decision I'd been contemplating for months. "Use funds from my personal account, not joint assets." For the next 2 hours, we restructured my financial life. By the time we finished, I had secured the penthouse, segregated my company proceeds into untouchable accounts, drafted a post-nuptial agreement with the help of Jackson's legal team, and created a clear financial boundary between myself and the Parker family interests. "Will Nathan see this as an ultimatum?" Jackson asked as we reviewed the final arrangements. I considered the question carefully. Not an ultimatum, a clarification. For too long, the financial entanglement has muddied the waters about why we're together. This creates clarity. It was past midnight when I finally returned to our apartment. The anniversary dinner sat untouched on the table. Candles burned. Down to stubs, the special meal long since cold. Nathan wasn't home. I changed into comfortable clothes, wiped away my carefully applied makeup, and sat at the window overlooking the city. My phone buzzed with a text from Nathan. "Staying at my parents' tonight. We need to talk tomorrow." No mention of our anniversary. No apology for the ambush. No defense against his family's integration plan. Just another night where Parker family concerns took precedence over our marriage. I typed and deleted several responses before settling on a simple truth. "Yes, we do. I'll be meeting with the realtor at 10 a.m. about the Harbor Point penthouse. Join me if you'd like to see our potential new home." Then I silenced my phone, curled up on the sofa, and allowed myself to feel everything I'd suppressed in the Parker library. The hurt, the anger, the disappointment, but also a surprising sense of liberation. For 5 years, I'd been contorting myself to fit into a family mold that was never designed to accommodate someone like me. Tonight, I'd finally stopped trying. The morning light streamed through the windows, waking me on the sofa. I checked my phone to find multiple missed calls and messages, most from Nathan, but also several from Diana, and even one from Richard. I ignored them all as I showered and dressed in one of my favorite outfits, a sleek pantsuit in a vibrant teal that Diana had once described as attention-seeking and unsuitable for family functions. At 9:45, I headed to the harbor to meet the realtor, unsure whether Nathan would appear. The penthouse was even more stunning in the morning light. 3,000 square feet of modern luxury with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Boston Harbor. A stark contrast to the dark, traditional aesthetic of Parker Properties. "Mrs. Parker?" The realtor greeted me warmly. "Congratulations on your offer being accepted." The owners were thrilled with the quick closing timeline. "It's Ms. Chen, professionally," I corrected gently. "And thank you for accommodating the rushed schedule." We were halfway through the tour when the elevator announced another arrival. Nathan stepped out, looking like he hadn't slept, still wearing yesterday's rumpled suit. "You actually did it," he said, taking in the spectacular space. "You're really buying this place." "I've already bought it," I corrected calmly. "The offer was accepted last night." The realtor, sensing tension, discreetly excused herself to take a call in another room. Nathan paced to the windows, gazing out at the harbor. "My parents are livid. Dad tried to call your financial advisor, only to discover you've completely restructured our accounts." "I protected my assets," I clarified. "Our joint investments remain intact, just under new terms. Terms that exclude my family's financial advisors," he noted. "Terms that protect what I've built from people who've made it clear they don't respect me or my work." He turned to face me, conflict evident in his expression. "They were harsh. Last night, I know that. But they're just trying to preserve traditions that have sustained our family for generations. No, Nathan. They were trying to erase who I am and replace me with their idea of a suitable Parker wife. And you sat there and let them." He flinched at the accusation. "I was caught off guard. You know how they can be." "I do know. That's the problem. For 5 years, I've watched you choose their approval over supporting me. Last night was just the culmination." Nathan ran his hand through his hair, that familiar gesture of discomfort. "So this is what? Punishment? Financial? Retaliation?" I shook my head. "This is clarity. I need to know if you want to be married to me, Olivia Chen, startup founder who cooks Vietnamese food and doesn't fit the Parker mold, or if you want a wife who checks the appropriate society boxes. Because I can't be both." "It's not that simple," he protested. "Actually, it is." I walked to my purse and removed the post-nuptial agreement Jackson had prepared. "This outlines our new financial arrangement. My assets remain mine, including this penthouse. Our joint investments continue under neutral management. Your trust fund and family investments remain entirely yours." He took the document, scanning. The terms with the trained eye of someone who'd grown up in finance. "You're asking me to choose between my family's financial support and our marriage." "No. I'm asking you to choose between letting your family dictate our life together and building something that's truly ours. The financials just clarify the stakes." Nathan looked around the sun-filled penthouse, then back at the document in his hands. "I need time to think." "Take all the time you need," I said, handing him a key card. "This is yours. I'm moving. In next week. With or without you. The choice is entirely yours." As he left, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. For the first time since meeting the Parkers, I wasn't anxiously awaiting approval or acceptance. I was standing firmly in my own worth, creating boundaries that honored who I was rather than who they wanted me to be. Whether Nathan ultimately chose to join me in this new chapter remained to be seen. But either way, I knew I would no longer shrink myself to fit someone else's image of who I should be. And that certainty, more than the financial freedom or the spectacular new home, felt like the true beginning of my real life. The realtor handed me the final paperwork with a smile that couldn't quite mask her curiosity about the tension between Nathan and me. "Congratulations again, Ms. Chen. The penthouse is officially yours. The previous owners will be completely moved out by Friday, and you can begin moving in as early as Saturday morning." I signed the last document with a flourish, feeling the weight of the decision settle into something like certainty. "Thank you, Angela. I'll have my designer contact you about accessing the space tomorrow to take measurements. As Angela packed up her portfolio, she hesitated. If you don't mind, my asking, most couples I work with spend weeks debating tile choices and closet space. You made an offer without a second viewing and closed in 24 hours. I glanced out at the harbor, where sailboats cut clean white lines across the blue water. When you know what you want, hesitation only gets in the way. After she left, I stayed in the empty penthouse, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors as I moved from room to room, mentally placing furniture, planning color schemes, imagining a life uncompromised by Parker family expectations. My phone buzzed incessantly, Diana's name appearing for the 4th time that morning. I silenced it again and continued my solitary tour. The primary bedroom suite faced east, promising sunrises over the water. The second bedroom would make a perfect home office. The expansive kitchen with its marble countertops waited for the scents of lemongrass and star anise that Diana had found so objectionable. Each space represented not just square footage, but freedom, the physical manifestation of choosing myself, after years of contorting to fit someone else's expectations. I was standing on the balcony when I heard the elevator announce another arrival. Turning, I expected to see Nathan returning, perhaps having made his decision already. Instead, Richard Parker's imposing figure filled the doorway, his expression thunderous. "So this is where my son's money is going," he said without greeting, surveying the space with critical eyes. "Your son hasn't contributed a penny to this purchase," I replied calmly. "The penthouse is mine alone, bought with proceeds from my company's acquisition." Richard's eyebrows rose fractionally, the closest thing to surprise he ever displayed. Nathan mentioned some business transaction, but I assumed he was exaggerating the figures. Startups come and go, rarely amounting to anything substantial. "Perhaps you should have looked into it before dismissing it as my little project." I gestured to the view. "Would you like some water? It seems we're about to have a conversation you didn't schedule in advance." He ignored my offer, moving further into the space. "Diana is quite upset. She spent considerable time preparing that integration plan, and your abrupt departure last night was deeply disrespectful to the family." "Interesting perspective," I said, leaning against the kitchen island. "I found it disrespectful to be handed a document outlining how inadequate I am as a Parker wife after 5 years of marriage." Richard sighed heavily, adopting the tone he used when explaining particularly complex financial matters to women at social gatherings. "You misunderstand our intentions. The Parker name carries certain obligations. Diana was simply trying to help you navigate expectations that come with the position you occupy." "The position I occupy," I repeated. "You make marriage to your son sound like a corporate appointment." "In many ways it is," he said without irony. "The Parkers have maintained their standing in Boston society for generations through strategic alliances and careful image management. Each family member plays a role." I studied my father-in-law, his bespoke suit, his carefully cultivated patrician bearing, the absolute certainty with which he moved through the world. For the first time, I felt something close to pity rather than intimidation. "And what exactly is my role in this corporate structure, Richard?" He seemed pleased by the question, as though we were finally getting to a productive discussion. "You have potential, Olivia. Your background is unconventional, certainly, but you're intelligent and adaptable. With the right guidance, you could become a valuable asset to the Parker portfolio." "An asset," I echoed. "And if I prefer to be a person rather than an asset?" Irritation flickered across his features. "This attitude is precisely what concerns us. Nathan needs a partner who understands family obligations, who supports rather than challenges the Parker legacy. And you've decided I'm not that partner." "You've decided that through your actions," he corrected. "This impulsive property purchase, the financial restructuring, the public rejection of Diana's guidance. These are not the actions of someone committed to the family's best interests. I walked to the windows, giving myself a moment to formulate a response that wouldn't devolve into the argument he clearly expected. Have you ever asked what Nathan wants? Not what the Parker legacy demands, but what your son actually wants from his life? Richard's reflection in the glass showed momentary confusion. Nathan understands his responsibilities. He was raised to prioritize family interests. That's not what I asked. I turned to face him directly. In 5 years of marriage, I've watched Nathan struggle between being the Parker heir and being himself. Every time he shows enthusiasm for something outside the prescribed path, you or Diana redirect him back to family obligations. We provide guidance based on generations of success. You provide a script he's expected to follow without deviation, I interrupted, including who his wife should be and how she should behave. Richard's jaw tightened. You're being melodramatic. We simply have standards. Standards that conveniently exclude anyone who doesn't fit your narrow definition of acceptable. I finished. I've tried for 5 years to meet those standards while maintaining some semblance of my own identity. Last night made it clear that's not possible. He studied me with new calculation in his eyes. Is this about money, Olivia? Because if your company acquisition has put certain ideas in your head about your position, we should be direct. Nathan's trust is contingent on maintaining certain family expectations. Choices have consequences. The threat hung in the air. Between us, so familiar, it almost made me smile. Financial leverage had been the Parkers' favorite tool of control for as long as I'd known them. I'm well aware that choices have consequences, Richard. That's precisely why I bought this penthouse and restructured our finances, so that my choices would be truly mine, not calculations based on Parker approval. And you've put Nathan in an impossible position with this stunt, he said, anger finally breaking through his controlled facade, forcing him to choose between his wife and his family. No, I said firmly. I'm asking him to choose what kind of life he wants. One dictated by family obligation, or one we build together based on mutual respect. The financial arrangements simply ensure that whatever he chooses, it's because of his own desires, not financial pressure from either side. Richard moved closer. His imposing height meant to intimidate. Let me be clear. If Nathan signs your ridiculous agreement and chooses this rebellion, he will be cut off. Not just financially, but from the family entirely. I met his gaze without flinching. Then it will be a cleaner break than I expected. But that decision belongs to Nathan, not to you, and certainly not to me. You've changed, he said, accusation heavy in his tone. No, Richard, I've stopped pretending to be someone I'm not to earn approval that was never going to come. I walked to the door, signaling that our conversation was over. Nathan knows where to find me when he's ready to talk. I'd appreciate if you gave him the space to make his decision without additional pressure. Richard straightened his already impeccable tie. The Parkers have weathered greater challenges than an upstart daughter-in-law with delusions of independence. When this little power play collapses, don't expect a warm welcome back into the fold. After he left, I sank onto the floor, back against the cool wall, and finally allowed my hands to shake with the aftermath of adrenaline. Confronting Richard Parker on his own terms was something I wouldn't have dared even a week ago. The acquisition hadn't just changed my financial status. It had shifted something fundamental in how I saw myself in relation to the Parker dynasty. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Taylor. SOS, need update. Are you alive after the in-law showdown? Should I bring wine or whiskey to the new place? I smiled despite everything and texted back, both, and bring reinforcements. Operation Move Out starts tomorrow. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, a perfect Boston spring day. I arrived at our apartment to pack my personal belongings, hoping to avoid Nathan, who had texted that he was taking some time at his family's Cape Cod property to process everything. The apartment felt different already, less like home and more like a museum of compromises I'd made over the years. I started with my closet, separating the clothes I actually loved from the Diana-approved wardrobe I'd accumulated, the neutral-toned designer pieces that were appropriate for a Parker wife, but never felt like me. The resulting pile of rejects was surprisingly large. Taylor arrived as I was sorting through kitchen items, determination on her face, and 2 college friends in tow. "Reinforcements reporting for duty," she announced, surveying the apartment with a critical eye. "Please tell me we're not keeping that hideous painting Diana gave you for Christmas." "The hunting scene with dead pheasants? Definitely not coming to the penthouse." Taylor grinned. "That's my girl. Now catch me up while we pack. What exactly happened after the big reveal?" Nathan texted Joel asking for guy time on the Cape, so I know he's spiraling. For the next hour, as we wrapped dishes and sorted through belongings, I recounted the confrontation with the Parkers and Richard's unexpected visit to the penthouse. "He actually threatened to cut Nathan off completely?" Taylor's eyes widened. "That's some Succession-level family drama." "The Parkers wrote the playbook on using financial leverage for emotional control," I said, carefully wrapping my grandmother's teapot. Richard genuinely can't conceive of Nathan choosing anything over the family legacy. "And what do you think Nathan will choose?" she asked gently. I paused, considering the question. "I honestly don't know. 5 years ago, I would have said he'd choose me without hesitation. Now." I shrugged. The Parker gravitational pull is strong. Every time he tries to establish independence, they reel him back in with obligations and expectations. "And you're ready for the possibility that he might not sign the agreement?" "I have to be," I said, sealing a box with more force than necessary. I can't keep shrinking myself to fit into their world, not even for him. By afternoon, we had packed the essentials: my books, personal items, the art I'd chosen myself, kitchenware that held memories of my family rather than Parker-approved dinner parties. The apartment looked strangely lopsided with my things removed, like a stage set missing key props. As we loaded the last boxes into the moving van, Heather's silver Mercedes pulled up to the curb. She emerged looking uncharacteristically flustered, her normally perfect hair slightly out of place. "Olivia," she called, hurrying over. "I've been trying to reach you all day." Taylor moved protectively to my side. "She's been busy." Heather glanced at Taylor with the dismissive politeness she reserved for people she considered peripheral. "I need to speak with my sister-in-law privately." "Anything you need to say to me, you can say in front of my friends," I replied, hand resting on the moving van door. Heather's perfect facade cracked slightly. "Fine. Mother is beside herself, Nathan is unreachable, and Father is talking about contingency plans for the family trust. Is this chaos really worth whatever point?" "You're trying to make—" "I'm not trying to make a point, Heather. I'm establishing boundaries after years of having them ignored." "By blowing up the family?" She gestured to the moving van. "You're being terribly dramatic. So Mother was a bit heavy-handed with her suggestions. That's hardly reason to buy property and rewrite financial agreements." "It wasn't just the integration plan," I said, using air quotes around Diana's euphemism. "It was the culmination of 5 years of being treated like a permanently defective addition to the family." Portrait. Heather had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable. "No one thinks you're defective. You're just different. Mother was trying to help you fit in better. By erasing everything that makes me who I am," I finished. "My career, my cultural background, my independence. All of it replaceable if it doesn't align with the Parker image." "You're making it sound so sinister," she protested. "We all make compromises for family harmony." I studied her, perfectly coiffed, perfectly dressed in acceptable Parker attire. Her life arranged around social obligations and family appearances. What compromises have you made, Heather? Because from where I stand, you've built your entire identity around being the perfect Parker daughter. Her carefully composed expression faltered. That's unfair. I have my charity work, my committee, positions. All Parker-approved activities, I noted. When was the last time you did something just because you wanted to, not because it was expected of you? She blinked rapidly, momentarily at a loss for words. We're not talking about me. I came to ask what it would take to resolve this situation. Surely there's some compromise that doesn't involve Nathan having to choose between his wife and his family. That's just it, I said with sudden clarity. I don't want a compromise that leaves me halfway between Olivia Chen and whatever Parker-approved version of me you've all imagined. I want a husband who chooses our marriage because he values me, not because of financial arrangements or family pressure. Taylor touched my arm. The movers need to get going if we want to unload at the penthouse before dark. Heather looked genuinely distressed now. So, that's it? You're just leaving? I'm moving to my new home, I corrected. What happens next depends on Nathan, and whether your family can accept that I'm never going to be the perfect Parker wife you've envisioned. As we pulled away, I watched Heather in the side mirror, standing alone on the curb looking uncharacteristically lost. For the first time since I'd met her, I wondered if beneath her perfect Parker exterior was a woman who sometimes questioned the roles she'd been assigned. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity. The penthouse transformed from an empty shell into my sanctuary as furniture arrived, art was hung, and my belongings found new places. I deliberately chose pieces that would have horrified. Diana, vibrant colors, contemporary art, furniture selected for comfort rather than pedigree. My grandmother's Vietnamese ceramics, which had been relegated to storage in our apartment, now held places of honor on custom shelves. Taylor appointed herself project manager, coordinating deliveries and directing the small army of workers with cheerful efficiency. If you're going to make a statement about independence, the place should scream Olivia from every corner, she declared, approving the installation of a bold abstract painting in the entryway. By the 5th day, the penthouse felt like home. In a way, the apartment we'd shared with Nathan never had. I could breathe here without calculating how each choice might be judged by the next Parker family visitor. I was arranging herbs on the kitchen windowsill when my phone rang with Marcus Johnson's name, my mentor from the early startup days and now a trusted advisor. The prodigal protege finally answers, he said when I picked up. I've been trying to reach you for days. Rumors are flying about acquisitions and marital drama. I smiled at his familiar directness. Both true, though I'm sure the rumors are more entertaining than reality. So you didn't tell Boston's premier banking dynasty to shove their family legacy while buying a multi-million-dollar penthouse in cash? The amusement in his voice was evident. When you put it that way, it sounds like I'm having a midlife crisis 10 years early. Sounds to me like you're finally claiming your space, Marcus countered. About time, too. Every time I saw you, at those stuffy Parker functions, you looked like you were slowly disappearing. The observation hit closer to home than I'd expected. That's exactly how it felt. Like pieces of me were being trimmed away to fit their idea of who Nathan's wife should be. And now? He asked. How does independence feel? I looked around the sun-filled kitchen, at the space I'd created that reflected who I was rather than who someone else thought I should be. Terrifying, exhilarating, necessary. That's my girl, he said approvingly. Now to business. The acquisition news has hit the industry, and your stock options have already increased 12%. The tech community is buzzing about the coding chef, who quietly built a security platform worth 9 figures under the radar. Coding chef? I laughed. Is that really what they're calling me? Your food blog from the early days has resurfaced, he explained. Someone connected the dots between the Vietnamese recipes and the coding tutorials. It's created quite The narrative: immigrant family's daughter combines cultural heritage with tech innovation, builds empire while Boston Brahmins dismiss her as inconsequential. I winced. Please tell me that's not an actual headline. Not yet, but give the business press time. They love a good David versus Goliath story, especially with a diversity angle. His tone shifted to something more serious. The point is, you've become visible in a way you weren't before. The acquisition was just the first act. How you handle what comes next will define your reputation in the industry. What exactly are you suggesting? I'm saying opportunities are appearing. Speaking engagements, investment partnerships, board positions. Your inbox must be overflowing with requests. It was. I'd been ignoring most notifications while focusing on the move, but my professional email account had been accumulating messages at an alarming rate. I haven't had time to think about next steps, I admitted. The personal upheaval has taken precedence. Understandable, Marcus said, but don't wait too long. Momentum matters in this industry. Strike while your name is hot. After we hung up, I opened my laptop and began sorting through the backlog of messages. Marcus was right. Opportunities were flooding in. Tech conferences wanted me to speak about invisible innovation and disruption from unexpected sources. Investment firms sought meetings to discuss potential partnerships. Startup incubators asked about mentorship programs focusing on women and minorities in tech. One email in particular caught my attention: an invitation to speak at a women's leadership summit happening in Boston the following month. The theme was authentic innovation, breaking barriers without breaking yourself. The irony wasn't lost on me. As I drafted a response accepting the invitation, a notification appeared from a real estate listing I'd set up years ago, but forgotten about. A commercial property in my old neighborhood had just come on the market. The building had once housed my grandmother's small Vietnamese restaurant before rising rents forced her to close. I'd always harbored a quiet dream of reopening it someday, honoring her legacy while creating something of my own. I clicked through the listing photos, memories washing over me. The space needed work, but the bones were good. With the acquisition proceeds, purchasing it would barely dent my new financial cushion. And the timing felt significant. A chance to reclaim another piece of my heritage just as I was reclaiming my personal identity. Without overthinking it, I sent the listing to my real estate agent with a simple message: interested in viewing. ASAP. The decision felt impulsive yet right, like buying the penthouse. For too long, I'd deferred dreams large and small to accommodate the Parker vision of appropriate ambitions for a family member. Now, each choice I made without their influence felt like reclaiming pieces of myself I'd willingly surrendered in the name of acceptance. As evening fell, I sat on the balcony with a glass of wine, watching lights twinkle on across the harbor. The city looked different from this vantage point, more expansive, full of possibilities rather than constraints. My phone remained silent. No texts from Nathan, no calls from Diana. Even Richard seemed to have exhausted his immediate strategies for bringing me back in line. The temporary peace felt both welcome and unsettling. Part of me had expected the Parker machine to mobilize more aggressively, to deploy whatever resources necessary to prevent a disruption to their carefully cultivated family narrative. Their silence suggested either strategic patience or, more concerning, confidence that Nathan would ultimately choose family loyalty over our marriage. The question that kept circling in my mind wasn't whether Nathan would choose me. It was whether I still wanted him to. The woman who had spent 5 years seeking Parker approval no longer existed. The woman who had emerged in her place needed a partner willing to build something new, untethered from family expectation and obligation. The elevator chimed, pulling me from my thoughts. Taylor had a key, but she'd texted earlier that she was having dinner with Joel. No one else had access yet. I moved cautiously inside, where Nathan stood in the center of the living room, taking in the space with undisguised surprise. The penthouse had transformed dramatically since his first visit. No longer an empty shell, but a home that reflected my taste, my heritage, my personality. "You've been busy," he said, his gaze moving from the vibrant art to the comfortable furniture to the kitchen where fresh herbs lined the windowsill. "It looks like you." "That was the point," I replied, leaning against the doorframe. "How did you get up here?" "I asked the doorman to announce me, but you didn't answer. He recognized me from the closing paperwork as your husband." He gestured vaguely. "I should have called first." "Yes, you should have." I moved further into the room but maintained distance between us. "How was Cape Cod?" "Clarifying," he said after a moment. I did a lot of thinking. "And?" He reached into his jacket and withdrew the post-nuptial agreement I'd left with him days earlier. "I read this about 20 times. Had Joel review it too, since he handles family law." My stomach tightened. "And your conclusion?" "It's fair," he said simply. "More than fair, actually. You're protecting your assets while still maintaining our partnership. You're not asking for anything from my trust or family holdings. You're just establishing independence. That surprises you?" He ran a hand through his hair. That familiar gesture of discomfort. "After your confrontation with my parents, I half expected scorched earth. Dad was convinced you were setting up to take half the family fortune in a divorce." "I never wanted the Parker fortune," I said truthfully. "I only ever wanted you, the real you, not the Parker air performance you put on around your family." Nathan moved to the windows, looking out at the harbor view. "Dad came to see me at the Cape House. He had papers drawn up, a post-nup of his own design. Very different terms from yours. Let me guess. Protections for the Parker assets with significant consequences if I failed to adhere to family expectations?" "Essentially," he admitted. "Along with some clauses about appropriate spousal behavior and family loyalty considerations that read like they were drafted in the 1950s. And?" He turned to face me directly. I told him I wouldn't sign it, that if forcing me to choose was the game he wanted to play, he might not like the outcome. My breath caught. How did he take that? About as well as you'd expect. There were threats about the trust, about my position at the firm, about family legacy. A wry smile touched his lips. The usual Parker arsenal of financial consequences. "And you're here," I observed cautiously. "Does that mean you've made your decision?" Nathan approached slowly, stopping an arm's length away. "I have your agreement with me signed, but before I give it to you, I need to know something." "What's that?" "Are you still in this marriage? Really in it? Because if this is just a financial restructuring before an exit strategy, I'd rather know now." The directness of the question took me by surprise. "I bought this penthouse for myself because I needed space to figure out who I am outside of Parker expectations. But I never said I wanted to end our marriage." "You didn't have, to say it," he pointed out. "Actions speak louder. New home, separate finances, complete life restructuring without consultation." "After 5 years of compromising myself at every turn to fit into your family's expectations?" I challenged. "Yes, I made unilateral decisions about my life, my career, and my assets. Because every joint decision we've made has eventually been shaped by Parker standards." He flinched, but didn't argue the point. "Fair enough. So where does that leave us?" I considered the question carefully. "That depends on what you want, Nathan. Not what your family expects, not what obligation dictates, what you actually want." "I want my wife back," he said simply. "But I'm starting to realize the woman I fell in love with disappeared so gradually into Parker expectations that I barely noticed until she suddenly reclaimed herself and bought a penthouse." "She didn't disappear," I corrected gently. "She just learned to make herself smaller to fit the space your family allowed her." Nathan closed his eyes briefly, pain evident in his expression. "I let that happen. Worse, I encouraged it because it was easier than challenging the family structure. Yes, I agreed, not softening the truth. You did. He opened his eyes, determination replacing the regret. I can't undo that. But I can make different choices now. He held out the signed agreement. Starting with this, my assets remain mine, yours remain yours, and whatever we build together from this point forward belongs to both of us. No Parker, trust conditions, no family leverage points. I took the document, our fingers briefly touching. And your family? We'll need to adjust to the new reality, he said firmly. I'm not cutting them off. They're still my family. But the dynamics are changing. They don't get to dictate terms for our marriage or your place in it. They won't accept that easily, I warned. Diana's integration plan wasn't a suggestion. It was an expectation with consequences. Then they'll face their own choices, he replied. But I'm done letting family obligation determine my personal happiness. He gestured to the space around us. So does this penthouse have room for a reformed Parker heir trying to figure out who he is outside of family expectations? The question hung between us, genuine, vulnerable, without the polished Parker confidence that had been his default setting for years. This was the Nathan I'd fallen in love with, the man who occasionally broke through the family conditioning when we were alone. There's room, I said carefully, but only for Nathan, not for the Parker heir performance. I can't go back to adjusting myself to fit family expectations. I wouldn't ask you to, he said quietly. Seeing this place, how it reflects who you really are, made me realize how much of yourself you've set aside. I don't want that version of our marriage back either. I studied him, looking for signs of the familiar pattern, initial enthusiasm, for independence followed by eventual capitulation to family pressure. Your father will escalate when he realizes you're serious. The trust, your position at the firm, your standing in the family, he'll leverage all of it. Nathan nodded, resignation mixed with resolve. I know. For the first time, I'm prepared for that. Maybe it's time I figured out who I am without the Parker safety net anyway. That's a significant change in perspective for someone who's never been without that safety net, I observed. I've had a good teacher in independence lately, he said with a hint of a smile. A certain startup founder who refused to let other people define her worth. Despite everything, I felt a flicker of hope. Cautious but real. This won't be easy. Redefining our relationship while you're potentially at war with your family. No, he agreed. But it might be worth it. He glanced around the penthouse. Again. So, do I get a tour of our potential new home? Or am I still in the probationary husband phase? Definitely probationary, I said, but softened it with a small smile. But yes, you can have the tour, starting with the office I've set up to plan my next venture. Which is? I felt a surge of the excitement I'd been carrying since seeing the listing for my grandmother's old restaurant space. I'm thinking of combining my two passions. A tech incubator focused on immigrant founders, housed in the building where my grandmother's restaurant once stood. Technology and Vietnamese cuisine under one roof. The surprise and genuine interest in his expression felt like the first authentic reaction I'd seen from him in years, uncalculated, unfiltered by Parker considerations. The coding chef strikes again, he said with something close to admiration. I'd like to hear more about it, if you're willing to share. I might be, I allowed. Eventually. As I led him through the penthouse, explaining my vision for each space, I maintained an emotional distance, protecting myself against the possibility that this apparent transformation was temporary. Nathan seemed to understand, respecting the boundaries without pushing for more than I was ready to give. When we reached the second bedroom I'd converted into an office, he paused before a framed photo on the wall, one taken long before I'd met the Parkers, showing me in my grandmother's kitchen, both of us laughing as we prepared spring rolls together. "I've never seen this," he said softly. "It stayed packed away in our apartment," I admitted. Diana made it clear early on that family photos should be cohesive in style and setting. Something shifted in his expression, realization dawning, of just how many small surrenders had accumulated over the years. "I'm sorry, Olivia, not just for the big things, but for all the little dismissals I let pass without challenge." The simple acknowledgement touched something deep. Not a complete healing, but perhaps the beginning of one. "We can't go back," I said, giving voice to the truth we both needed to face. "Too much has changed. I've changed." "I know," he replied. "I'm not asking to go back. I'm asking for the chance to go forward. Differently. Together." Outside, the harbor lights reflected on the water. The city spread out before us in a tapestry of possibility. The path forward remained uncertain, the Parker family response an inevitable storm gathering on the horizon. But standing in the home I'd created as a declaration of independence, I felt ready to face whatever came next, with or without Nathan, but never again with less than my full self at the center of my choices. "Forward is possible," I said finally, "but only if we both choose it every day, not just in the easy moments but in the hard ones, especially in the hard ones." He nodded, understanding the terms. "One day at a time, then?" "One choice at a time," I corrected gently. "Starting now." Morning light streamed through the penthouse windows, casting long rectangles of gold across the hardwood floors. I stood at the kitchen island, coffee mug warming my hands as I reviewed the commercial property listing on my tablet. The building that once housed my grandmother's restaurant had deteriorated over the years, but the realtor's new photos confirmed what I remembered. Good bones beneath the neglect, high ceilings, large windows facing the street, and most importantly, the original brick oven my grandfather had built by hand still intact in the back wall. "Anything interesting?" Nathan asked, emerging from the guest bedroom where he'd insisted on sleeping for the past week. This new arrangement, living together but separately, felt strange yet necessary as we navigated the fragile beginnings of our redefined relationship. I turned the tablet toward him. "Remember that Vietnamese restaurant I took you to on our third date? The one I told you my grandmother owned before rising rents forced her out?" He studied the listing, recognition dawning. "The building's for sale? Are you thinking about buying it?" "More than thinking about it," I admitted. "I have a viewing scheduled this afternoon. The location is perfect for the incubator concept. Close to the university, accessible by public transportation, and with significance beyond just commercial value." Nathan scrolled through the photos, lingering on one showing the faded outline of my grandmother's restaurant sign still visible on the brick exterior. "This matters to you." It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. My grandmother arrived in Boston with nothing but recipes memorized and determination to give her family a better life. That restaurant put my mother through college and helped fund my first semester before scholarships kicked in. I traced the outline of the building on the screen. "It's where I learned to code, actually, at the corner table after closing, while Bon Goai prepared for the next day." "You never told me that," Nathan said quietly. "There are many things about my family I never shared," I replied, the truth of it settling between us. After a while, it seemed easier to compartmentalize than to hear them dismissed as charming ethnic anecdotes at Parker gatherings. He winced, the barb finding its mark. "I'd like to come with you today, to the viewing." The request surprised me. "You have meetings at the firm all afternoon." "I can reschedule." "Your father won't like that." A flash of the old Nathan, deferential, concerned with Parker expectations, flickered across his face before resolution replaced it. "Then he won't like it." 2 hours later, we stood inside the empty restaurant space, dust motes dancing in the shafts of light penetrating the boarded windows. The real estate agent had given us privacy after unlocking the space, sensing the emotional weight it carried. I moved through the rooms slowly, memories flooding back with each step. The worn spot on the floor where my grandmother had stood for decades preparing dishes. The wall where height marks tracked my growth in faded pencil. The small office where she had taught me to calculate profit margins and inventory costs. My first lessons in business management disguised as family responsibility. "You can still see the outline of the kitchen layout," Nathan observed, tracing water lines along the back wall. "The plumbing infrastructure is intact, just capped off." I nodded, running my hand along the brick oven's curved entrance. Ba would start the fire at 4 a.m. every morning. Said the bricks needed to get to know the day before they could properly bake the perfect banh mi. "You never mention your grandmother in present tense," Nathan noted carefully. "When did she pass?" The question caught me off guard. After 5 years of marriage, this basic piece of my history remained unshared. Not through active concealment, but through the gradual habit of keeping my Vietnamese roots separate from my Parker life. 3 years ago, I said softly. "During that business trip you took to London with your father, I flew to attend the funeral alone because I knew explaining its importance would be complicated." Nathan's expression shifted from surprise to genuine hurt. "You went to your grandmother's funeral alone? Why didn't you tell me? I would have come back immediately." "Would you have?" I challenged gently. "It was the Whittier acquisition. Richard had been preparing you for months. The timing seemed inconvenient for the Parker agenda," he finished, understanding dawning. "So you just handled it yourself?" "It seemed easier at the time," I admitted. Like many choices I made to keep our worlds from colliding. We fell silent. The weight of all the unshared moments, the separated lives we'd lived even while married, filling the dusty space between us. "The building needs work," I said finally, returning to safer ground. "But the location is excellent, and commercial properties in this neighborhood rarely come on the market." Nathan studied me rather than the building. "You're going to buy it regardless of what I think." "Yes," I confirmed, no hesitation in my voice. "But I'd still like to know what you think." He circled the main space, professional assessment, taking over as he examined structural elements and potential issues. Nathan had trained in commercial real estate before Richard guided him toward investment banking, another Parker-directed life choice. "The foundation is solid. Roof likely needs replacement. The brick is in remarkable condition." He pointed toward water stains along one wall. "Some drainage issues to address, but nothing catastrophic. Honestly, the bones are exceptional." "And as a business concept? The incubator paired with a restaurant revival?" Nathan considered the question seriously. "Unconventional but compelling. Tech spaces usually aim for sterile modernism, glass and steel aesthetic. Combining innovation with cultural heritage creates a distinctive brand identity." He smiled, slightly more genuine than his usual Parker-perfect expression. "Plus, I've missed your grandmother's pho. If you're reviving her recipes, that alone makes it a worthy investment." The simple acknowledgement of enjoying my family's food, something he'd been careful not to mention around his parents, felt like a small bridge across the chasm between our separate worlds. "I think you should make an offer today," he added, unexpectedly. "Properties like this move quickly." I raised an eyebrow. "No cautions about impulsive decisions? No suggestions to consult with Parker financial advisors first?" He met my gaze directly. "You've never needed the Parker stamp of approval on your financial decisions. Your investment instincts are better than most of the analysts at the firm, including mine." The compliment, delivered without qualification, contrasted sharply with years of subtle undermining from Richard and Diana regarding my business acumen. Before I could respond, my phone vibrated with a text from Taylor. "SOS. Diana Parker spotted entering your building 10 minutes ago. Dorman tried to stop her, but she pulled the mother-in-law card hard. I showed Nathan the message, watching his expression harden. "Seems our grace period with your family has expired." "I should have expected this," he said grimly. "When I missed the partners' meeting this morning and didn't respond to Dad's calls. It was only a matter of time before they escalated." "We should head back," I suggested, already dreading the confrontation waiting at the penthouse. Nathan hesitated, looking around the restaurant space once more. "Not yet. Make your offer first. Diana is literally at our house right now. And she can wait," he said firmly. "This matters to you. It matters to us, this new version of us we're trying to build. I'm not letting my mother's dramatic timing derail something important." The declaration, small but significant, represented exactly the shift I'd hoped to see in our relationship. Parker family emergencies had always taken precedence over everything. This deliberate choice to prioritize our plans felt revolutionary. I called the real estate agent back inside and made an offer on the spot, slightly above asking price with expedited closing terms. Within 20 minutes, a verbal acceptance came through. By the time we left the building, I had signed preliminary paperwork and scheduled the inspection for the following day. The drive back to the penthouse passed in tense silence, both of us preparing for whatever awaited. Diana Parker's interventions typically involved a precise mixture of emotional manipulation, veiled threats, and occasional tears, all delivered with impeccable upper-class restraint. When we entered the penthouse, we found Diana perched on the edge of a living room chair, as though afraid to fully commit to sitting on furniture she hadn't personally approved. Her tailored ivory suit remained unwrinkled despite what must have been hours of waiting, her pearls gleaming in the afternoon light. "There you are," she said, rising with practiced grace. I was beginning to worry. "Nathan, you weren't at the firm this morning, and you've missed 3 calls from your father." "Hello, Mother," Nathan replied evenly. "I wasn't aware we had plans to meet today." Diana's gaze swept over both of us, lingering on our casual attire with barely concealed disapproval. When my son abandons his professional responsibilities and stops responding to family communications, I think a mother's concern is justified. "I didn't abandon anything," Nathan corrected. "I rescheduled meetings to attend to personal matters." Diana's attention shifted to me, her smile tightening. "Olivia, dear, this space you've created is certainly making a statement." She gestured vaguely toward the Vietnamese artwork and vibrant furnishings, though perhaps not the statement a Parker wife typically makes. "That was rather the point," I replied calmly, moving to the kitchen to put distance between us. "Can I offer you some tea, Diana?" "No, thank you." She remained standing, clearly unwilling to concede the home field advantage. "I won't pretend this is a social call. Richard and I are deeply concerned about the direction things have taken." Nathan moved to stand beside me, a small but significant positioning. "If you're referring to Olivia's company acquisition and our financial restructuring, those matters are settled." Diana waved dismissively. "Financial arrangements can always be adjusted when cooler heads prevail. What concerns us more deeply is this apparent rejection of family values and traditions." "Which traditions specifically?" I asked. "The ones outlined in your integration plan? Or the unwritten expectations that I erase my identity to better fit the Parker image?" Color rose in Diana's cheeks, the only crack in her perfect composure. "That's an unfair characterization. We were trying to help you navigate social contexts that were clearly unfamiliar to you. By suggesting I abandon my career, change how I dress, speak, and cook, and devote myself to country club activities I find meaningless." I kept my tone conversational rather than confrontational. "Those weren't navigation suggestions, Diana. They were erasure requirements." She turned to Nathan, deploying the wounded maternal expression I'd seen her use countless times when direct confrontation failed. Is this how you allow your wife to speak about family efforts to welcome her? Actually, Nathan replied, I think Olivia's characterization is remarkably restrained given the circumstances. The integration plan was offensive, Mother. You know, I know it. Let's not pretend otherwise. Diana's composure slipped further, genuine shock registering at Nathan's direct challenge. In 5 years of marriage, he had never openly opposed his mother's version of events or sided with me against family consensus. Your father warned me this might happen, she said after a moment, regrouping. He said the financial independence might embolden certain NAR influences. I didn't want to believe him. Certain influences, I repeated, making no effort to hide my incredulity. You mean my influence on my own husband? Nathan has responsibilities beyond this marriage, Diana continued as though I hadn't spoken. Obligations to the family, legacy to the firm, to generations of Parkers who built everything you're now encouraging him to abandon. I haven't abandoned anything, Nathan interjected. I'm still at the firm. I still attend board meetings. I'm still a Parker. I've simply chosen to also be a supportive husband to a remarkable woman whose success you seem pathologically unable to acknowledge. Diana's eyes widened at his tone. You missed the Whitcomb Foundation meeting yesterday, the first Parker absence in 20 years. You've rescheduled client meetings without consulting your father? You're living in this. She gestured around the penthouse. Statement property rather than the home you established together. The home we established under Parker supervision, I corrected, with Parker-approved furnishings, Parker-approved artworks, and Parker-approved social gatherings. And you wonder why we worry, Diana said, focusing again on Nathan while pointedly ignoring my comment. These dramatic changes, this sudden rejection of family guidance, it's not like you, Nathan. Maybe it should have been, he replied, quietly. Maybe I should have stood up years ago when you first began trying to reshape my wife into someone who fit your narrow definition of acceptable. Diana's perfect posture stiffened further. I see there's no point continuing this conversation today. You're clearly not in a receptive frame of mind. She collected her handbag with deliberate movements. Your father will expect you at the Eye. Partners breakfast tomorrow, 7 a.m. sharp. Family traditions continue regardless of personal disruptions. As she moved toward the door, she paused, turning back with her social smile firmly in place. Oh, and one more thing. The Littlefield Gala is Saturday evening. The family will be seated at the main benefactor table as usual. Richard has already confirmed our attendance with the foundation chair. The obligation hung in the air, not a request, but a statement of expected compliance. The Littlefield Foundation represented one of the Parker family's most significant philanthropic affiliations, with Richard serving on the board for over a decade. We'll let you know, Nathan replied, neither accepting nor rejecting the obligation outright. Diana's smile didn't waver, though her eyes hardened slightly. The seating arrangements have already been finalized, dear. The Parker family table, as always. After she left, Nathan exhaled slowly, tension visibly draining from his shoulders. That was actually more restrained than I expected. That was just the reconnaissance mission, I noted, moving to pour us both a glass of water. She came to assess the situation and report back to Richard. The real offensive will come next. Nathan nodded, accepting the water gratefully. The partners' breakfast tomorrow. Dad won't be subtle. Are you going? He considered the question carefully. I think I have to. Not because they expect it, but because avoiding direct confrontation only postpones the inevitable. And the Littlefield Gala? I asked, testing the boundaries of our fragile new balance. That depends, he said, looking at me directly. Do you want to go? The question caught me off guard, not because it was asked, but because it was asked genuinely, without the subtle pressure toward the Parker preferred answer that had characterized similar questions throughout our marriage. The honest answer? No, I admitted. Those events have always been exercises in calculated humiliation. Diana introducing me with subtle reminders of my unique background. Heather correcting my etiquette with sibling concern. Richard steering conversations away from my professional achievements. But I recognize the foundation's importance to your family. Nathan studied me thoughtfully. What if we attended on our terms this time? Not as Parker family extensions, but as ourselves. Nathan and Olivia, tech entrepreneur and investment, banker who happen to support the foundation's work? You mean arrive separately from the family? Reject the assigned seating? A smile tugged at his lips. Exactly that. It's a public charity event, not a private Parker function. There's nothing stopping us from buying our own tickets and sitting wherever we choose. The suggestion held a certain appealing defiance, though I recognized the significant breach of Parker protocol it represented. Your father would see it as a declaration of war. Maybe it's time to clarify the terms of engagement, Nathan replied, surprising me again with his willingness to push boundaries. Starting with the basic principle that we make our own decisions about social obligations. I considered the potential fallout, Richard's cold fury, Diana's wounded disapproval, the inevitable family meeting where Nathan's loyalty would be questioned yet again. Are you sure you're ready for that level of confrontation? The Parker response won't be subtle. I'm not saying it will be easy, he acknowledged, but continuing to operate under their assumptions of control isn't an option anymore. He reached for my hand, the gesture tentative. Not if we're really rebuilding this relationship on honest foundations. His touch felt both familiar and new, the physical connection we'd maintained even as emotional distance grew between us. I didn't pull away, but didn't fully reciprocate either, still cautious about rushing back into intimacy before trust had been rebuilt. One day at a time, I reminded him, gently withdrawing my hand. Let's start with the partners' breakfast tomorrow and see how that goes before we plan our grand entrance at the gala. Nathan nodded, accepting the boundary without protest. Fair enough. Though I should warn you, once we start setting our own course, the Parker containment strategies will escalate quickly. Are you prepared for what might come next? It was a valid question. For years, I'd bent to Parker expectations specifically to avoid the consequences of defiance. The subtle social exclusions, the pointed comments about cultural differences, the professional connections mysteriously withdrawn, all carefully calibrated to enforce compliance without leaving fingerprints. I think the question is whether you're prepared, I countered. They're your family. Their approval has been the cornerstone of your identity since childhood. Are you genuinely ready to function without it if necessary? He didn't answer immediately, his gaze drifting to the harbor view as he considered the question with appropriate seriousness. I don't know, he finally admitted. I'd like to believe I'm strong enough to choose my own path regardless of their reaction, but honesty compels me to acknowledge it won't be that simple. Their influence runs deep. The candid acknowledgement of vulnerability felt more meaningful than any confident declaration of independence would have. This was the honest foundation we needed. Recognition of the real challenges ahead rather than bravado that would crumble under pressure. Then we take it step by step, I said, starting with you setting boundaries at tomorrow's breakfast. Nathan's phone chimed with an incoming text. He checked it, his expression darkening. Heather says Dad's called an emergency family meeting tonight. Family only. The battle lines are being drawn, I observed. So it seems. He hesitated before asking, would it bother you if I went? Not to comply with demands, but to hear directly what they're planning rather than waiting for it to unfold. I considered the request, searching for signs of the old pattern, capitulation masked as reasonable compromise. Instead, I found genuine strategic thinking. Intelligence gathering makes sense. Just remember who you're dealing with. Richard didn't build his banking empire without mastering emotional leverage. I'm well aware, Nathan said grimly. I've watched him deploy it my entire life. After Nathan left for the Parker mansion, I found myself restless in the penthouse despite its spaciousness. The confrontation with Diana had left me on edge, aware that we were entering a new phase of conflict with the Parkers, one where they would no longer maintain polite pretenses or work through subtle manipulations. I called Taylor, needing the grounding influence of someone who had known me before the Parker complications. Diana made her first move, I said when she answered. Reconnaissance disguised as maternal concern. Wearing pearls and that wounded aristocrat expression? Complete with non-specific references to my ethnic background and implications that I'm turning Nathan against his family, I confirmed, smiling despite the tension. Classic Diana, Taylor sighed. Where's Nathan now? Headed to an emergency? Family meeting at the Parker mansion, family only. Taylor's concern came through clearly. You're letting him go alone? After everything? Letting him implies I have the right to prevent him, I countered. We're trying to build something based on mutual respect, not exchanging one form of control for another. Fair point, she conceded. But the Parkers have decades of experience. Manipulating him. That's a lot of conditioning to overcome in one family showdown. I know. I moved to the balcony, watching evening settle over the harbor. But he needs to make these choices himself, or none of this means anything. And if he comes back fully reparkerized, talking about family obligations and reasonable compromises? The possibility had haunted me since he'd left, though I tried to maintain faith in the changes I'd seen. Then I'll know where we stand. Better clarity now than another 5 years of slowly disappearing into Parker expectations. After hanging up, I turned my attention to work, reviewing the inspection checklist for tomorrow's building assessment and drafting initial plans for the incubator space. Focusing on my own projects helped calm the anxiety about what was transpiring at the Parker mansion. Around midnight, I heard the elevator announce an arrival. Nathan entered looking exhausted, his tie loosened, hair disheveled as though he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly, his telltale sign of stress. How bad was it? I asked, setting aside my laptop. Worse than I expected, better than I feared, he replied, dropping onto the sofa beside me. Dad brought in the family attorney to outline the legal and financial ramifications of recent developments. Meaning the consequences of defying Parker expectations? Nathan nodded wearily. 3 hours of detailed explanations about trust, conditions, partnership agreements, and family bylaws I didn't even know existed. Apparently, my position at the firm is contingent on maintaining appropriate family standing, which they're now suggesting might be compromised. They're threatening your job, I translated. Among other things. He loosened his tie further. The Cape House my grandfather left me apparently has inheritance conditions regarding family unity. The trust distributions have morality clauses. Even the Family Foundation Board position comes with behavioral expectations. The systematic removal of all safety nets, financial, professional, familial, was textbook Richard Parker. I'd seen him deploy similar strategies against business. Rivals, though never against his own son. What did you tell them? I asked carefully. Very little, actually. I mostly listened as they outlined worst-case scenarios designed to terrify me back into compliance. A wry smile touched his lips. Dad even had grandfather's pocket watch on prominent display, the one passed down through generations of Parker men, the symbolic reminder of legacy at stake. Subtle, I commented dryly. About as subtle as a cardiac arrest. Nathan shifted to face me directly. The only thing that surprised me was Heather. What about her? She pulled me aside afterward when Dad and Mom were conferring with the attorney. Asked me if I was genuinely happy in this new arrangement. Not accusatory, not manipulative. She seemed sincerely concerned about my well-being rather than family appearances. I raised an eyebrow, skeptical of any Parker showing genuine concern beyond image considerations. And you believe her sincerity because she told me something she's never shared with anyone in the family. He hesitated. She and Klaus are separating, have been living apart for 3 months while maintaining appearances for the Parker social calendar. The revelation caught me by surprise. Perfect Heather, with her perfect marriage and perfect compliance with Parker expectations, the standard against which Diana had measured me and found me lacking for years, was secretly dealing with marital collapse. No one else knows? Nathan shook his head. She's terrified of Dad's reaction. Said watching me stand up to the family made her question how much she's sacrificed to maintain the Parker image. Asked if you might be willing to talk with her sometime. Me? I couldn't hide my incredulity. The perpetual disappointment as a Parker wife? The cultural misfit she's been subtly correcting for years? Apparently, your refusal to be erased anymore has made an impression. Nathan rubbed his temples, fatigue evident. I'm not suggesting you need to become confidants, just noting that the family unity they presented tonight had more cracks than they wanted me to see. I processed this new information, recalibrating my understanding of the Parker dynamics. And the partners' breakfast tomorrow? Are you still planning to attend? Yes, he confirmed, though Dad made it clear he expects a decision regarding the Littlefield Gala by then. The family will present a united front as always. His tone made the Parker motto sound like a prison sentence rather than a point of pride. And your decision? Nathan met my gaze directly. I meant what I said earlier. If we attend, it will be on our terms, not as Parker accessories. But I want us to decide together. The simple acknowledgement that major decisions would be made jointly rather than according to Parker dictates felt like a significant step forward in our recalibrated relationship. Let's see how tomorrow goes first, I suggested. 1. Parker confrontation at a time. He nodded, exhaustion finally overtaking him. Mind if I shower before bed? I feel like I need to wash off 3 hours of family manipulation. Of course, there are fresh towels in the guest bathroom. As he headed toward the hallway, he paused. Olivia, thank you for not saying I told you so about tonight. You've been warning me about these exact tactics for years. Saying I told you so would imply I take pleasure in your family's manipulation, I replied softly. I don't. I just want you to see it clearly so you can make choices with open eyes. After Nathan disappeared into the guest room, I returned to the balcony, watching moonlight silver the harbor waters. The evening had unfolded much as I'd expected, Richard deploying every available lever of control, Diana reinforcing family expectations, the full weight of Parker legacy leveraged against individual choice. What I hadn't anticipated was Heather's private struggle or her reaching out to Nathan. The possibility that other Parkers might be suffering silently under the burden of perfection added a new dimension to our situation. Perhaps our stand against family control might create ripples beyond our marriage. Tomorrow would bring new challenges with the partners' breakfast and building inspection. The Littlefield Gala decision loomed beyond that. Each choice represented another step in defining where the boundaries would stand between our marriage and Parker family expectations. For tonight, the simple fact that Nathan had returned from the family meeting still committed to our shared path felt like victory enough. Small steps forward, one decision at a time, rebuilding trust between us even as Parker pressure mounted from all sides. The building inspector finished his assessment of the restaurant space just as morning gave way to afternoon, his clipboard thick with notes and measurements. I followed him through the final walkthrough, listening to his professional observations about foundation integrity, electrical systems, and the remarkably well-preserved original features. "The brick oven is the crown jewel," he said, running his hand along the curved interior. "Hand-built craftsmanship like this doesn't exist anymore. With proper restoration, it could serve both your restaurant concept and create a striking focal point for the modern tech space." I nodded, envisioning how the space would transform. Startup founders collaborating over laptops while the scent of traditional Vietnamese cooking filled the air. Old-world craftsmanship merged with cutting-edge innovation. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. "Timeline for renovation?" I asked, already formulating plans. "Given the scope of work and permit requirements, I'd estimate 4 to 6 months for complete transformation," he replied, packing his equipment. "But the good news is you're working with excellent bones. Your grandmother chose well when she leased this space." After he left, I stood alone in the empty restaurant, absorbing the silence and possibility. My phone buzzed with a text from Nathan. "Partner's breakfast over. Need to talk. Coming to the building." The terse message conveyed nothing about how the confrontation with Richard had gone, though the lack of detail suggested it hadn't been pleasant. I spent the time waiting by sketching rough layout ideas for the combined space, channeling nervous energy into creative planning. Nathan arrived 20 minutes later, his usually immaculate appearance slightly disheveled. His tie hung loosely around his neck, jacket draped over his arm, and the careful Parker polish had been replaced by something more authentic, exhaustion mixed with determination. "How bad was it?" I asked without preamble. "Dad offered me a promotion," he said, his tone making it clear this hadn't been good news. "Senior partner track, expanded responsibilities, increased salary. Contingent, of course, on demonstrating renewed commitment to family values and appropriate professional behavior." I set down my pencil. The golden handcuffs approach. "Exactly." Nathan moved to the window facing the street, looking out at the neighborhood where my grandmother had built her small piece of the American dream. He also made it clear that declining the promotion would be interpreted as choosing personal interests over family obligations, the kind of choice that might necessitate reviewing my position at the firm entirely. "So you're being promoted? Or terminated with no middle ground," I summarized. "That's about the size of it." He turned back to me, something new in his expression, a clarity I hadn't seen before. I told him I needed 24 hours to consider the offer. And what did he say to that? A smile tugged at Nathan's lips, the first genuine one I'd seen in days. He said family loyalty shouldn't require 24 hours of consideration, that the right choice should be obvious to any Parker worth the name. "Implying you might not be worth the name if you hesitate," I noted. "Precisely." Nathan approached the brick oven, examining the craftsmanship with new appreciation. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday about building something together, about creating value rather than just preserving it." I waited, sensing he was working toward something important. "I want to invest in this," he said, gesturing around the space. "Not Parker family money, not trust fund distributions. My own capital from investments I've managed independently. I want to be your partner in this venture." The offer surprised me more than I'd expected. "Nathan, you don't need to prove anything by—" "It's not about proving anything," he interrupted. "It's about choosing what I want to build rather than what I'm expected to inherit. The incubator concept is brilliant, but it could be even better. With someone who understands both the tech sector and the financial infrastructure needed to support multiple startups simultaneously." I studied his face, looking for signs of the familiar pattern: enthusiasm followed by gradual capitulation to family pressure. Instead, I found something different: conviction. "Your father would see this as a complete betrayal," I pointed out. "Investing in a venture that celebrates everything the Parkers have spent 5 years trying to minimize about me." "Good," Nathan said simply. "Maybe it's time I stopped making decisions based on his approval." Before I could respond, my phone rang with an unknown number. "Ms. Chen, This is Amanda Littlefield from the Littlefield Foundation. I hope you don't mind my calling directly, but I wanted to discuss Saturday evening's gala. I felt Nathan tense. Beside me, Amanda Littlefield was the foundation chair's daughter, a Harvard MBA who had modernized the organization's approach to philanthropy while maintaining its social prominence. "Of course," I said, putting the call on speaker. "How can I help you?" "I've been following your company's acquisition with great interest," Amanda continued. "Your background in developing security platforms for underserved communities aligns perfectly with our new initiative supporting technology access for immigrants and refugees. I'd love to discuss potential partnership opportunities." Nathan's eyebrows rose. This was the first he'd heard of my company's community focus, another aspect of my professional life I'd kept separate from Parker social circles. "I'd be happy to discuss that," I replied, though I should mention I'm no longer affiliated with my former company following the acquisition. "Actually, that makes you even more interesting," Amanda said. "I understand you might be starting something new. Independent ventures often have more flexibility to pursue meaningful partnerships. Would you be available for coffee this week?" After we arranged to meet, I hung up to find Nathan staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Security. Platforms for underserved communities?" he asked. "You never mentioned that aspect of your work." "There was never an appropriate moment," I replied, feeling defensive despite myself. Parker social conversations don't typically include discussions of economic inequality or technology access barriers. "That's not what I meant," Nathan said quickly. "I meant it's remarkable work, and I'm disappointed in myself for not asking more about it sooner." The simple acknowledgement felt like another small bridge across the divide between our separate worlds. "The immigrant focus was always part of the platform design," I explained. "My grandmother's restaurant struggled with basic payment processing and inventory management because the systems weren't designed for small businesses with limited English fluency. I built something that could adapt to different languages and cultural business practices." "And now Amanda Littlefield wants to partner with you," Nathan observed. "That's significant. The Littlefield Foundation has enormous influence in Boston philanthropic circles." "Which brings us back to Saturday's gala," I said. "Are we still planning to attend on our own terms?" Nathan's expression hardened with resolve. "More than ever, especially if you're going to be meeting with Amanda about partnership opportunities. The Parkers don't get to control your professional relationships through their social calendar." "That's going to cause problems," I warned. "Richard expects Parker family unity, especially at events where the family's philanthropic image is on display." "Then Richard is going to be disappointed," Nathan replied. "I'm tired of family image taking precedence over actual values. If he wants to explain to the Boston social scene why his son isn't sitting at the family table, that's his choice to make." The definitive tone suggested the Nathan I'd married was finally emerging from beneath years of Parker conditioning. Still, I needed to be certain he understood the implications. "This is the point of no return," I said seriously. "If we attend that gala as ourselves rather than Parker family extensions, there's no going back to the old arrangement. Your father will see it as a public rejection of everything he's built." "Maybe it's time someone in the family chose authenticity over image," Nathan replied, "starting with me." 3 days later, I stood in the penthouse's walk-in closet selecting my outfit for the Littlefield Gala. The dress I'd chosen was stunning, a deep emerald silk that complemented my complexion and made me feel confident rather than Parker appropriate. It was a deliberate choice, representing the woman I'd become rather than the one they'd wanted me to be. Nathan emerged from his dressing room wearing a classic black tuxedo, but with a twist. Emerald pocket square that matched my dress and cufflinks I'd given him for our first anniversary that he'd never worn to Parker functions. "Ready to cause a scandal?" he asked, offering his arm. "Define scandal," I replied, accepting the gesture. "Wearing complimentary colors to a charity gala? Or daring to enjoy ourselves without seeking family approval? Both, he said with a grin that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with him. Definitely both. The drive to the Four Seasons was quiet, both of us lost in our own thoughts about the evening ahead. The Littlefield Gala was Boston's premier philanthropic event, attended by the city's most influential families and business leaders. For the Parkers, it represented an annual showcase of their charitable prominence and social standing. Our decision to attend independently had been carefully orchestrated. Nathan had purchased our own tickets through his personal contacts, rather than accepting the family's traditional seating arrangement. We'd arrived separately from the Parker contingent, and would leave the same way. Small gestures, but revolutionary in the context of Parker family dynamics. The hotel's grand ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers and elegantly dressed guests. I spotted the Parker family table immediately, Richard and Diana holding court with their usual circle of old Boston money, Heather and Klaus maintaining their perfect facade despite their private struggles, Andrew and his wife playing their assigned roles in the family tableau. Second thoughts? Nathan asked, following my gaze. None whatsoever, I replied, and meant it. Though I suspect your father has noticed our absence by now. Indeed, Richard's expression when he spotted us across the room was thunderous. Diana's perfectly composed face showed the first cracks of genuine surprise. Heather, however, looked almost relieved, as though our independence gave her permission to imagine her own. Amanda Littlefield approached us near the bar, radiant in a classic black gown that spoke of old money and modern sensibility. Olivia, I'm so glad you could make it. And you must be Nathan. I've heard wonderful things about your work at Parker Investments. All true, I hope, Nathan replied with easy charm. Though I understand you're more interested in my wife's innovative work than my traditional banking background. Amanda's eyes lit up. Your wife is being modest about her achievements. The security platform she developed has applications far beyond what we initially discussed. I'd love to introduce you both to some colleagues who share our interest in technology-driven social impact. For the next hour, Amanda guided us through a series of conversations with foundation board members, tech entrepreneurs, and social impact investors. Each introduction felt natural, unforced, the kind of networking that happened when people shared genuine interests rather than social obligations. You're different tonight, Nathan observed during a brief lull in conversations. You more yourself than I've seen you at any Parker function. That's because I'm not performing the role of Parker wife, I replied. I'm just Olivia Chen, tech entrepreneur who happens to be married to Nathan Parker. And how does that feel? I considered the question, watching the elegant crowd mingle around us. Revolutionary, I said finally. Absolutely revolutionary. Our peaceful evening was interrupted when Richard Parker approached, his expression carefully controlled, but his displeasure evident to anyone who knew him well. Nathan, Olivia, he said with forced civility. Enjoying the evening? We were surprised not to see you at the family table. We're having a wonderful time, Nathan replied evenly. The Foundation's new initiatives are fascinating. Did you know they're expanding their technology access programs to include entrepreneurship, training for immigrant communities? Richard's jaw tightened slightly. Yes, well, the Foundation has always been forward-thinking, though I imagine some of their newer programs might benefit from more traditional oversight. The coded criticism wasn't subtle. Richard's way of suggesting that innovation should be tempered by established authority. It was also a direct challenge to the work Amanda had described to us. Actually, I interjected, the beauty of their approach is how they combine institutional resources with community-driven innovation. Rather than imposing solutions from above, they're supporting entrepreneurs who understand their community's actual needs. How progressive, Richard replied, his tone making it clear he didn't consider that a compliment. Though I've always found that experience and established expertise provide necessary guardrails for well-intentioned enthusiasm. Experience certainly has value, Nathan agreed, but so does the willingness to recognize when established approaches might not serve everyone equally well. Father and son locked eyes across the small space between them, years of unspoken conflict crystallizing in that moment. Richard's expression shifted from mere displeasure to genuine anger as he realized Nathan wasn't backing down. "I see," Richard said finally. "Well, I hope this independence proves as fulfilling as you both seem to believe it will." After he walked away, Nathan exhaled slowly. That was him officially declaring war, wasn't it? That was him recognizing that his control tactics aren't working anymore, I corrected. The war was declared the moment we bought separate tickets to this event. As the evening progressed, we moved freely through the crowd, enjoying conversations, without calculating their impact on Parker family standing. I found myself discussing the restaurant renovation with a chef who specialized in fusion cuisine, sharing ideas about how to honor traditional techniques while embracing innovation. Nathan connected with several tech investors interested in his perspective on the intersection of traditional finance and startup funding. "You know," Nathan said as we stood on the hotel's terrace overlooking the harbor, "this is what I imagined marriage would be like. Partners supporting each other's ambitions, sharing interests, building something together. Instead of one person disappearing into the other's family expectations," I added. "Exactly." He turned to face me directly, moonlight reflecting off the water behind him. "I owe you an apology, Olivia. Not just for the family meeting or the integration plan, but for 5 years of allowing you to shrink yourself to fit a role that was never worthy of who you are." The apology felt genuine, earned through action rather than just words. "Apology accepted," I said softly. "But more importantly, where do we go from here?" "Forward," he replied without hesitation. "Together? But as ourselves. No more Parker family performance, no more separate worlds. Just us, building something authentic. Even if it means your father cuts you off completely?" Nathan's smile was sad but resolute. "Especially then. I've spent my entire life seeking his approval. Maybe it's time I found out who I am without it." The following Monday morning brought consequences swift and decisive. Nathan's keycard access to Parker Investments was deactivated, his office cleared out by security, and his nameplate removed from the building directory. Richard had wasted no time demonstrating the cost of defying family expectations. "Any regrets?" I asked as Nathan sorted through the personal items they'd sent to the penthouse. "None," he replied, though I could see the weight of the decision in his expression. "Though, I'll admit it's strange to suddenly have no professional identity after 15 years at the firm." "You have an identity," I corrected. "It's just not the one your father assigned you anymore." Nathan nodded, picking up the framed photo of us from our honeymoon that had sat on his desk for years. "Amanda. Littlefield called this morning. She wants to discuss the possibility of establishing a Parker Chen Foundation focused on immigrant entrepreneurship. Apparently, our conversation at the gala made quite an impression." "Parker Chen?" I raised an eyebrow. "That's a statement." "That's the point," he replied. "Time to build something that reflects who we actually are, rather than who we're expected to be." 2 weeks later, I stood in the renovated restaurant space, watching contractors install the final pieces of equipment. The brick oven had been restored to full functionality, its original craftsmanship now complemented by modern technology that allowed both traditional cooking and contemporary innovation. The tech incubator occupied the main dining area, with startup founders working on laptops, while the scent of Vietnamese coffee and spices filled the air. Nathan emerged from what had once been my grandmother's office, now converted into a sleek conference room where we'd been meeting with potential foundation partners. "The investor group is confirmed for Thursday," he reported. 5 startups selected for the first cohort, with 2 additional applicants pending final review. And the restaurant opening? Next month, he confirmed. The chef you hired has been testing recipes all week. Turns out your grandmother's pho recipe is going to be the signature dish. I felt a deep satisfaction at hearing that. The circle was completing itself. My grandmother's legacy preserved and transformed, my professional skills applied to community benefit, and Nathan finally free to build something meaningful rather than merely inherited. Any word from your family? I asked carefully. Nathan's expression darkened slightly. Heather called yesterday. She and Klaus are officially separating, and she wanted to thank us for showing her that choosing authenticity over image was possible. And your parents? Radio silence, he replied, though I suspect that won't last forever. Richard doesn't like loose ends, and our success threatens the narrative he's constructed about family obligations. As if summoned by our conversation, Diana Parker appeared in the doorway, looking incongruous in her Chanel suit among the modern restaurant fixtures and tech equipment. I hope you don't mind the intrusion, she said, her usual social composure, slightly strained. I wanted to see what you've built here. Nathan and I exchanged glances, both surprised by her appearance and uncertain about her intentions. Of course, I replied cautiously. Would you like a tour? For the next 20 minutes, Diana moved through the space with careful attention, asking questions about the incubator program, the restaurant concept, and the foundation's goals. Her questions were genuine rather than performative, lacking the subtle criticism that had characterized her previous interactions with my work. It's remarkable, she said finally, standing beside the restored brick oven. Your grandmother would be proud. The simple acknowledgement caught me off guard. You remember my grandmother? Diana nodded. I met her once at your wedding rehearsal dinner. She spoke about this place, about building something that would last. I dismissed it then as sentimental attachment to the past. She paused, studying the oven's craftsmanship. I was wrong. Mother, Nathan said carefully, what are you really doing here? Diana turned to face both of us, her composure finally cracking to reveal something genuine underneath. I'm trying to understand how I failed so completely as a mother that my son felt he had to choose between his family and his happiness. The admission hung in the air between us, raw and unexpected. You didn't fail as a mother, Nathan replied gently. But you did fail to see that love and control aren't the same thing. Diana's eyes filled with tears. She quickly blinked away. Richard is furious about your independence. He sees it as a personal betrayal, a rejection of everything he's built. And what do you see? I asked. She considered the question carefully. I see my son happier than he's been in years. I see a daughter-in-law who's accomplished remarkable things that I was too proud to acknowledge. And I see a marriage that's stronger for having been built on choice rather than obligation. That doesn't sound like Richard's position, Nathan observed. No, Diana agreed. It's not. We're not in agreement about many things lately. The revelation suggested fractures in the Parker marriage that mirrored the broader family upheaval. Diana's willingness to acknowledge our success, even tentatively, represented a significant shift from her previous position. What happens now? I asked. Diana straightened her shoulders, rebuilding her composure. Now I try to figure out how to be a mother and mother-in-law who supports rather than controls. It's not a role I was trained for, but perhaps it's one I can learn. She moved toward the door, then paused. The foundation work you're doing, it matters. The integration plan I gave you was wrong, and I'm sorry for that. You never needed to become someone else to be worthy of this family. We needed to become better at recognizing worth when it didn't fit our narrow expectations. After she left, Nathan and I stood in the restaurant's warm afternoon light, processing the unexpected conversation. Think she means it? Nathan asked. I think she's trying to, I replied, which is more than I expected from any Parker family member 6 months ago. Nathan pulled me close, and for the first time in years, the gesture felt completely natural. Whatever happens with the family going forward, I want you to know something. This, us, the foundation, this space, it's the life I want. Not because it's the path of least resistance, but because it's the path that leads to who I actually want to be. I leaned into his embrace, feeling the weight of months of uncertainty finally lifting. Then let's keep building it, together. 6 months later, the Parker Chen Foundation had funded 12 immigrant-owned startups. The restaurant had become a neighborhood institution, and Nathan had established himself as an independent investor specializing in social impact ventures. Richard Parker remained estranged from his son, unable to reconcile Nathan's choices with his own worldview. But Diana had slowly begun building a relationship with us based on respect rather than control, acknowledging that the daughter-in-law she'd tried to remake had been remarkable all along. Standing in the garden of our penthouse, watching sunset paint the harbor gold, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. The woman who had once contorted herself to fit Parker expectations no longer existed. In her place stood someone who had learned that the most profound act of love, for oneself and for others, was sometimes the quiet, dignified refusal to be diminished. My phone buzzed with a text from Amanda Littlefield. Just saw the wall. Street Journal feature on the foundation. Congratulations on changing the conversation about immigrant entrepreneurship. Your grandmother would be proud. She was right. Bon Gowai would be proud, not just of the business success, but of the choice to honor heritage while embracing innovation, to build bridges rather than walls, and to create value that extended far beyond financial gain. Any regrets? Nathan asked, joining me on the balcony. None, I replied, meaning it completely. Not about the confrontation, not about the choices, not about choosing myself over their expectations. And us? He asked. Any regrets about giving us another chance? I considered the question, looking at the man who had finally chosen authenticity over obligation, partnership over control. None about that either. We're not the same people who got married 5 years ago. We're better. Nathan smiled, the expression reaching his eyes in a way it hadn't during our Parker-constrained years. To being better then. To building something real. To building something real, I agreed, raising my glass to meet his. And to never apologizing for taking up space in the world again. The city lights began to twinkle across the harbor, each one representing a story, a choice, a person claiming their place in the world. For too long, I had allowed others to define the space I was allowed to occupy. Now, at last, I was living. Without apology, building without permission, and loving without compromise. This was my legacy. Not the wealth others had coveted or the status they had demanded, but the example of a life reclaimed, a marriage rebuilt, and a future constructed on authentic foundations. Sometimes the most radical act is simply refusing to be anything other than who you truly are. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.